this movie got me pissed. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my masculine feminine energies film breakdown series with Legends of the Fall. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I talk about this in most of my videos, but a brief summary: masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies, but we all have a core energy that's the one we're most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it often does. We can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies, and all of these energies contain archetypes, and we can actually embody all of the archetypes, and we can tap into each one whenever we need to at a given time. I have several videos about the masculine archetypes and the feminine archetypes. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine energy and one partner to be in the feminine energy. These opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So Legends of the Fall was a film recommendation. I had never seen this movie, but I do remember like when it came out. The film is from 1994, but it was set in the times of World War I. This film is about a retired war colonel and Montana rancher played by Anthony Hopkins and his 3 sons. Alfred is the oldest son. He is Mr. Responsibility. Tristan is the middle son, played by Brad Pitt, who is like the wild man. And Samuel is the youngest son, who is the one who is sort of babied and protected in the family. And the boy's mother basically decides she doesn't like life on the ranch and she's gonna go live somewhere else. So basically the parents aren't officially divorced, but they essentially separate, and the mother does write a lot of letters. There's still communication going on, but she's not really present in the boy's life. So it's this father who's kind of raising his sons on his own, and there's not a lot of feminine energy on this ranch. So Samuel, the youngest son, goes off to school. He goes to Harvard and he meets Susanna. He falls in love and they get engaged, and he brings Susanna back so that they can create a life together. And the minute that Susanna comes back on the ranch, you can tell there is a shift. I explored this a little bit in my Remains of the Day breakdown, where, ironically also with Anthony Hopkins, where when you have this world that becomes very masculine, there's a lot of masculine energy there, when you put feminine energy in that world, it can really shake things up, and it very much does shake things up. There's actually a reference to, because there's a lot of Native American culture going on in this movie, there are a lot of references that could very well be tied into the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Sort of this analogy that Susanna broke apart the family, but not intentionally, and there's a reference that she was like water that gets between the rocks and then expands and breaks the rock. It's like the water doesn't mean to break the rock, but that's just what it does. And actually feminine energy is very much represented by water, and masculine energy is represented by rock. And I think that it does kind of play on that masculine feminine dynamic of the idea that the feminine is always flowing, but the feminine can get into the cracks of the masculine rock, and when it expands it can actually like break open the rock. I think that's actually a very, I don't know, I think it was a very poignant symbolism. So Susanna is a very feminine character. She's feminine throughout the whole film. She's so open-hearted. She just loves life. She's very connected to the earth. You can tell she really takes to being there on the ranch. It becomes like home to her. She very much connects with nature, and you can kind of tell. It's actually mentioned at one point that her parents have passed on, so she's really somebody who's looking for a family, and the feminine will very often look for love and connection. And we meet little Isabel, and she's actually named after the boy's mother. They call her Isabel too. In the first scene with Susanna and Isabel too, they just have this really beautiful connection. I think the divine feminine has such a connection with children and with nature, and Susanna really does connect with just the whole ranch in that way. And it's very obvious that all these boys really do fall in love with Susanna. I think even the father is really enamored with her as well, because she's this breath of feminine fresh air that just comes in to this world that is very masculine. Now Samuel is in love with Susanna, and Susanna is very in love with Samuel. There's a conversation early on when Samuel is talking to Tristan, and Tristan is definitely more of the wild man. He's rough around the edges. He's not as polished as the other boys. And Samuel has this conversation with Tristan, essentially that he is intimidated by Susanna's passion, as he puts it, which is really her feminine energy, like that passionate love of life, a joy of life, her sensuality, her sexuality. That's all very feminine energy. And he basically confesses that he's intimidated by that, really. And it kind of goes to show the fact that Samuel has been so loved and protected that he hasn't fully, like, he's a responsible adult, but he hasn't really fully stepped into like his strong, confident king energy yet. And it's interesting how he has this confession with Tristan, and there's kind of a scene where essentially Samuel's trying to say that like he's a little bit nervous about like making love to his future wife, and Tristan's basically telling him to like just like go for it, like to really like it's the difference between the idea of this man who's like I want to make love to her, and this man who's like I want to have like this hot passionate polarity with a woman type of thing. And neither one of them are right or wrong, and there's a place for both. But I think it's a sign that Samuel hasn't fully stepped into his grown-up, mature, masculine energy yet, so he's still intimidated by Susanna's feminine energy. Tristan doesn't have that same intimidation because he's out in the wilderness, he's facing bears, he's taming wild horses, so feminine energy doesn't intimidate him in the same way because he's so fearless. Like he is the epitome of a warrior. He's got that warrior energy. I have a whole breakdown of the masculine archetypes, and he is like all warrior energy. He's the fierce protector, but he's wild and untamed. It's like he's taming wild horses, but he's not tame himself, like that kind of thing. There's a lot of correlations to the fact that he's got this like soul connection with a grizzly bear, which is very primal. Like Tristan's very primal in that sense. I think that at the end of the day, what women really want sexually is they want a man who's going to be open-hearted and loving with her, and also have that like primal passion with her. So Susanna ends up a little bit torn because she starts to feel an attraction for Tristan because she is craving some of that primal passion. And they have a lot of sexual polarity in the beginning, especially when the boys all decide that they're going to all enlist and go off to war. Even though their father doesn't want them to do it, he is a war veteran. He really doesn't think much of war. He wants his boys to stay there and be safe. The boys all decide to go off and fight. And there's a scene before they go off to war where Tristan basically promises Susanna that he will keep Samuel safe. And they have this real passionate connection. Like they get really close, and there's so much polarity there because Susanna is so relaxed in her feminine energy. She's being vulnerable. She's crying because she's worried about this man who she loves. And the fact that Tristan is like, I will protect him, I will keep him safe. It's that protector energy combined with her open-hearted vulnerability that like, I mean, there's this polarity, this chemistry that's happening between the two of them. They go off to war, and Tristan really takes it on himself to make sure that Samuel is safe. Unfortunately, he's unable to keep Samuel safe, and Samuel ends up dying in war. Alfred gets injured and gets sent back, but he survives, and Tristan ends up coming back after Samuel dies. And you can tell that this has just completely destroyed Tristan. He blames himself completely for not being able to keep his word. The masculine will really tear himself up about honor and about keeping his word, about trust. A masculine is only as good as his word. So in reality, he did everything he could in order to keep his brother safe, but the fact that he promised that he would bring his brother back and that he would keep him safe, and he was unable to do that, I mean, that is just devastating for the masculine. Even though it was beyond his control, to not be able to keep his word is incredibly, incredibly frustrating and stressful. Plus the fact that he witnessed his brother die, he's going through all these emotions, he hasn't really processed these emotions, so coming back is just really difficult for him. Now bear in mind, these boys have not really had a mother, so the fact that Susanna is so feminine, she's also so warm and nurturing. Like she has a very natural mother energy. Not mothering energy, but this very natural, like divine mother nurturing energy about her. She really does care for Tristan while he's going through his emotions. There's a scene where Tristan is crying at Samuel's gravesite. I have a video about men crying in relationships, and I think this is a really great example of a time when he is completely justified in needing to show his emotions, but he's kind of like trying to push her away. But she actually shifts into her safe space and creates the space so that Tristan can let his emotions flow. It's similar to the scene in Top Gun that I broke down with Meg Ryan and her character really giving Tom Cruise's character this like permission to release his emotions. That warm, nurturing mother energy can be so comforting when the masculine really does need to move through his emotions. The masculine is not typically comfortable expressing emotions. He tends to feel a lot of shame. It's not his natural state. For the feminine, crying and showing emotions is very natural. The masculine is not as natural. It's necessary and important for him to be able to do that. However, it's not as natural. So having the feminine there, a very warm, nurturing, that sort of that divine mother energy around him to hold him and hold space for him while he goes through that is incredibly, incredibly healing. And that's where they come together. But I think what really ends up happening is the fact that Tristan just becomes very erratic. His warrior energy becomes very unstable. It's also very clear that Susanna really wants to become a mother. She has so much mother instinct in her that she clearly really wants to become a mother. So she talks about becoming a mother. She's kind of slipping into mothering Tristan, because even though Tristan is a warrior, he's a protector, he really is becoming unstable and erratic and hasn't really stepped into the stability of his masculine energy. I think it's really evident in a scene where Tristan and his father and two of the men who work with them, one of them who's an Indian, all go to a bar, and the father is trying to order 4 beers, and the bar is basically saying that they won't serve Indians. Different time period, right? And it's interesting because the father is very grounded and he is going to stick to his guns. He's got a lot of king energy within him. It's that grounded stability of, I'm going to take charge of the situation and I'm going to handle the situation. That's very stable masculine energy. Tristan starts to try to fight. He gets very erratic. That is very unstable masculine energy, and things escalate and things get really ugly, and there ends up being a fight and all this threatening. And I think that's the moment that the father really realizes that Tristan really isn't okay. Tristan's not a stable warrior at that point. Tristan is very erratic. That kind of erratic masculine energy, it's very unsafe. It can feel very unstable. But if we're talking about a woman who is very connected to her mother energy, that can very easily slip into wanting to mother him and care for him. And so that's, I think, very often where you get women who tend to fall for the bad boys, because it's like, oh, he just needs love, I need to nurture him. And I've actually talked about this topic in a couple other videos, my Dirty Dancing breakdown, my The Notebook breakdown. This kind of enters into the category of Hollywood painting this picture of the quote-unquote bad boy being the romantic, being the one that the woman falls in love with, that can't get out of her mind. And Alfred ends up confessing, the oldest brother, ends up confessing to Susanna that he's been in love with her since he met her. Alfred is this very stable guy, but he's kind of very uninteresting. And Alfred goes through this big change in the movie where he ends up deciding that he's gonna stop fighting for his father's approval. He knows his father loves Tristan more. He's gonna go off and do his own thing. And he actually does. He becomes very successful, builds a business, builds a company, ends up becoming a congressman. Like, he ends up doing all these things. There is a level of this desperation for his father's approval, and I do think that part of his like instant love and obsession with Susanna is probably his longing for a mother figure in his life that he hasn't felt like he had. However, he still holds on to this love of Susanna. So you have this love triangle going on where Susanna is in love with Tristan. Tristan kind of is disconnected from his heart and is kind of in his own world. And Alfred is in love with Susanna. So you've got this weird like triangle thing going on. And again, this goes back to the idea that the bad boy is always the sexy one, and that the stable provider is always the boring one, or sometimes the jerk, depending on, you know, how you look at it. Like in The Notebook, it was kind of like he was the boring guy. Like he was great, but he was boring. Or you had like in Dirty Dancing, where it's like, oh, the guy that had like success and potential, he's the jerk, right? And it's always like the bad boy that is the one that's like you've got the sexual polarity with. I personally think that's programming, but if you think about it in this particular situation, Alfred really does step into his king energy, right? He really does step into that grounded king, but he doesn't feel like a protector. He doesn't necessarily feel that primal drive to be a warrior. Whereas you have Tristan, who is like all warrior, but he's very erratic with it, and he's very unstable, and he's also very closed-hearted as well. So he is shut down. When the warrior energy in divine masculine energy becomes the predominant energy in a man, that very often can mean his heart gets shut down. If you think about it, if you're going to be a warrior and you're going to fight, you need to have a certain level of your heart not being fully open, because if your heart is open, you may not be able to actually do what you need to do in order to fight and protect. So there needs to be that level of like fearless disconnection to a certain extent. I'm not talking about anything like like completely disconnected, but there needs to be some level of like, if you need to be able to kill in order to protect, you need to kind of take some of your heart out of that, because if you're just so open-hearted and loving to everything, you may not actually be able to fight as hard as you need to fight in order to be that strong warrior. So you have Tristan, who's this like primal warrior but hasn't stepped into his king, and you have Alfred, who's stepped into this like king leadership, stability, provider energy, but he hasn't really connected to that primal warrior in him. And what women want is both. Like the idea of this like king provider and the idea of this like primal warrior, like that's what women want. Like we want men to connect to both of those energies in the same way that men want a woman who knows how to be like a lady in the streets but a freak in the sheets. Like they want a woman who can connect to that, like the warm nurturing mother and her regal queen, as well as her like, you know, sexual energy and stuff like that. Like men want all the facets of the feminine. I have a lot of videos on the feminine archetypes, and there's a lot more of them because the feminine contains a ton of flavors. The masculine is a little bit more simple in their archetypes, but in reality, women do really want men to be able to tap into all of the masculine archetypes. They want a man who can be that king-like leader, and the man who can be that primal warrior, and the man who can also be the open-hearted lover, and the man who can be the wise magician. Like they want all of that stuff. And in reality, it's actually better for men to tap into all of those things because they're going to become more successful. At the end of the day, yes, Alfred was very successful, but if he really tapped into that warrior energy, he probably could have taken on even more. You know what I mean? Like it's not just doing it for women, but it's also better for men to tap into those things, but it also will be much more attractive to women. So Tristan really does hit a low point, and he decides that he needs to leave. And there's this really, I find it very unsettling scene where Tristan basically is saying that he's leaving, and Susanna really doesn't want him to leave. And he's like acting as if he just doesn't care. Like he just totally doesn't care. And she's like, you know, if I had a baby, would you stay? And he's like, no. It's heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking because she does love him so much. But the reality is that when the masculine feels lost, when he feels like he doesn't have a purpose, when he doesn't feel like he is really fully connected to who he truly is, very often he will need to be away from the feminine and actually surround himself with just masculine energy. That's why men's groups are really important. That's why, you know, having a strong, great group of male support is really important. Not every man is necessarily going to go off to some, you know, foreign land and decide to, you know, become a hunter and connect to the earth. But some men may need to do that. Some men need to go off on retreats, or some men need to go off in solitude or go into a monastery or whatever. There's different variations, but at the end of the day, if men really get lost being in the presence of feminine energy, particularly a loving, warm, nurturing feminine energy, because that's one of the things about Susanna is she's so warm and loving and nurturing. She's not exactly tapped into that anger and aggression. We never see that in her. So the fact that she's so warm, loving, and nurturing, Tristan's never gonna grow. He's never gonna mature. He's never gonna actually find his passion and purpose with someone who is so loving. And I know that very often as women, we think that our love can heal anything. But at the end of the day, sometimes that love is not enough for the masculine to step up. He needs to find that within himself. And Tristan really does have to go away, and he really needs to find himself because he's totally lost. And oh, as heartbreaking as it is, he really needs to do that without Susanna. So he goes off to these other places. He becomes a hunter, and he learns about the hunt. It's a very primal, and he's connecting to his warrior and stuff, and he goes off and he basically ends up writing to Susanna and telling her, you know, that their engagement is off, that she needs to marry another and move on. So she decides to move on with Alfred, even though she still holds a lot of love in her heart for Tristan. And I've mentioned this in other videos, but the feminine she'll always long for the masculine who has loved her the deepest, or that she's felt the deepest. And with Tristan, he was at that point the only man she'd ever been with. So she had this heart connection with him. She had this sexual connection with him. I don't want to say she settled for Alfred because she ended up with a really amazing life. But Alfred was not tapped into enough of that primal energy. He wasn't tapped, there wasn't enough sexual polarity. Alfred was just a good man, but he didn't have that primal sense of that primal warrior. He was all provider and Tristan was all protector. Ideally, masculinity really is about providing and protecting. So both of these guys were like kind of not fully complete in their masculine energy. So as a feminine being, in reality, neither of these guys were really living up to what she truly needed in a man. She wanted the stability that she got from Alfred. She was longing for that, but she was also longing for that warrior energy, that protector, that primal energy. And in reality, if you think about it, she really did take to life on the ranch. Alfred ended up leaving, kind of like his mother did, and he kind of created this life that was really what his mother would have wanted, and kind of lured Savannah into it. And I mean, you could definitely say there's definitely some mother issues that are going on here with all of these boys. They obviously have a lot of mother wounding that they need to work through because they have a sense of abandonment from their mother, but that could be a whole other video. So Tristan comes back from his quest to find himself, and Susanna has married Alfred and she's moved on. As she puts it, forever ended up being too long. Now, while Tristan and Susanna were together, she told him that she longed for children, and that if they had a boy, she wanted to name him Samuel, obviously after his younger brother, her former fiance. And if they had a girl, they would name her Isabel after the boy's mother. So Tristan comes back from his quest, and you find out that Susanna and Alfred have tried to have children, but that they have been unable to. So Susanna is really not able to be a mother. And Tristan comes back and runs into Isabel too, the little girl who has lived on the ranch with her parents to, you know, help take care of the ranch. And she's grown up. She's 20, as they say. She's always had a crush on Tristan as a little girl. And now she's 20, and the two of them get together. Now, I know she's legal. I know. But like, I was like, this is creepy. Like, it's just creepy. I'm sorry. It's disturbing. It's creepy. Like, he knew her as a little girl. Like, they mentioned a few times that like she was like a sister to them. Like, she was named after their mom. Oh, no. Oh, no. I mean, I kind of saw that coming to a certain extent, but I was also like, okay, to me, this is where we start getting into like Hollywood, like creepo factor, like this like barely legal girl, he falls in love with her now that she's legal. Like, I don't know, I was like, ooh, this is creepy. I did not like that at all. Then she has his baby. Then they name their son Samuel. I was pissed. Okay, I don't usually get this heated when I watch these movies, but I was pissed. I'm like, first of all, he runs off with this like practically little girl, okay, and then they have a kid together, and then not only does this little girl steal Susanna's man, but then she steals her baby name. I'm like, you don't steal a woman's baby name. Like, I was like heated. Oh my god, I was so angry. I was like, no. Like, when that happened, I almost shut off the movie. I was like, no, you do not. I was so pissed. Anyway, calming down. Oh man, they have another baby, but it's interesting how they don't say what the younger baby's name was. I don't even think that they say what gender the second baby was. And oh my god, and then there's a scene where Alfred is, you know, about to give a political speech, so him and Susanna are like, you know, the good politicians at this event, and Tristan and Isabella too, and their two kids like meet, and Susanna is basically talking to little Samuel, and oh my god, in the scene where she's basically saying that he looks just like his uncle who's named after, and like you can tell it is just destroying Susanna. And oh my god, I felt that. Like, I felt that through my whole body. Like, I was just like so heartbroken. I was just like, oh my god, this woman, like, I just wanted to like cry right then and there. Like, Tristan kind of decides that he needs to become a bootlegger. He doesn't really know what else to do. He decides to become a bootlegger. Pisses off seems like it's probably the Irish mob who are connected to the police. They threaten him, and in the process of threatening him, Isabella too dies. It really does seem like Tristan really does bring death upon him. Susanna ends up so heartbroken that she ends up killing herself. And it's interesting. I think it goes to show that as much as Tristan longed to be a protector and was actually pretty good at being a protector when he was younger, but when he lost his way and just became so erratic, that erratic masculine energy is very unsafe. And I mean, this is an extreme example, but like, people around him keep dying. He survives, and then of course at the end, spoiler alert, he ends up getting killed by a grizzly bear, because there's this whole thing with him and a grizzly bear throughout. Like, he's got this primal grizzly bear connection. Yeah, unstable masculine energy, it can be very attractive. I mean, especially when it looks like Brad Pitt, but it can be very enticing and there can be a lot of polarity there, especially if you were a feminine being. However, that unstable masculine energy is not going to feel safe. In most cases, it's not going to necessarily kill everybody around it in, you know, the average day-to-day life. This is an extreme for the movie. However, unstable masculinity is incredibly unsafe because the masculine is supposed to be the protector. It's supposed to be the structure. And if you have a man, especially because men tend to be physically stronger, who is very unstable, very erratic, especially if he has a strong connection to his warrior, but he is not connected to that disciplined stability of his healthy masculine energy, of his king energy, it's going to be unsafe. It's going to be unsafe for everybody. And I think that's the energy that most women today are used to, unfortunately. I think that's why so many women fear masculinity, because that's what they think of when they think of masculinity. I was guilty of that too before I started studying some of this stuff, as I was like, well, no, masculinity must be unsafe because it's always unstable and erratic, because that was my experience with it. And in reality, knowing that true like king energy of healthy, stable masculinity is actually disciplined, it's protecting, it actually keeps people safe as opposed to putting people at risk. That's really important. It's an important distinction. I think that's something we've gotten away from a lot in our society, because so many of us associate masculine energy with erratic, dangerous behavior. So this movie did have some really great examples of different types of masculinity, how feminine energy connects with masculine energy, particularly when they're in a world that's been devoid of that, when you've got boys with mother issues and things like that. I still do think, again, this is 1994, so one of the reasons why I think more, which I guess for most people, 1994 is not modern day. It's modern day in my mind, but you start seeing it, and again, I've talked about this in some of the movies, a few movies from the 70s, which become very much more political, some movies that I've done from the 80s, where you get into this whole idea of like, the provider man is always bad, like you always want the bad boy, or you want the weaker, sensitive man. I think a lot of that's propaganda. I think, you know, movies like this and others, it kind of fetishizes this idea of the young girl who's like just become legal, which I think is really creepy and I think really disturbing. And then I think it also perpetuates this idea that the woman who is the natural divine mother, who has grown into this beautiful divine mother, is like infertile, and that this young inexperienced woman is the one who's like gets to have the babies and stuff. And I'm not saying that doesn't ever happen. Obviously, like fertility issues and things like that can happen, especially back in those days when they didn't have a lot of knowledge about the reproductive system and things like that or whatever. Like that stuff happens. That can happen at women at any age. But we have this perpetual idea that like, oh, if a woman is, and again, Susanna wasn't that old, mind you, but you have this idea that like if a woman is, you know, even 30 or whatever, well, she doesn't have any fertility left, so you got to chase after some woman who's just barely legal. Like we fetishize this like just barely legal idea of a woman, and this idea that like he grew up with her when like she was a little girl, and I know that she was always in love with him, but like I'm sorry, I just think it's creepy, and that just might be me, that might be my 42 years of age experience talking, but yeah, that part of the movie just really creeped me out and just really like, I was like, oh, you did not take her baby name. I have a story time, a baby name story thing that still boggles my mind that this was even a thing, but yeah. So I'm probably personalizing on this, but like, no, someone actually tried to take the baby name that I had planned if I ever had a kid. And on my wedding day, when I was getting my dress on, my future mother-in-law was telling me, she didn't know this, I don't think. I had told my ex-husband before I married him, if I had a daughter, what I wanted as a baby name. And so while I was putting my wedding dress on, getting ready to get married, my ex's mother, my future mother-in-law, was telling me about their new cat. She told me that the man I was about to marry told her to name their new cat the same name that I had picked as my baby name. And I was like, what? And like, she didn't know that was the name. She didn't know that was my baby name that I had picked out. I'm like putting on my wedding dress and I'm like, wait a minute, you mean to tell me that the man I'm about to marry told his mother to name her new cat the name that I wanted to name our daughter if we had one? Like, and this wasn't even giving it to a human. This was like giving it to a cat. That should have been a sign. I should have been a runaway bride. It would have saved me a lot of time in divorce court. But anyway, that wasn't why we got divorced, but it should have been why I didn't get married. Anyway, so if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. So I highly encourage you to watch this movie after you watch this video. See if you can pick up on some of the things that I mentioned in this video. See if you get as pissed as me. Probably not, because I don't know if anyone can get as pissed as me watching this. But anyway, I am really glad that I watched this movie because I do think it gave a lot of really great examples of masculine feminine dynamics. I really appreciated it. It was a request. So if you have any requests or any comments or anything about this video, then let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you would like to learn the art of feminine communication, I have a masterclass you can check out. Details in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.